So this paper is an attempt to document past investment by USAID in international agricultural research that's been allocated to US universities. So this program, over its 40-year period that we studied from 1978 roughly to 2018, USAID invested about $1.24 billion over the entire 40 years, which was only about $31 million a year on average. And what we find is that benefits to this investment are up to 8.5 times greater than what USAID invested.
We suspect that agricultural research is one of those foreign investments that really do make a difference. And because you're generating new technologies, if you can get those adopted by farmers, you get permanent increase in their productivity. So you get benefits that go much longer, that last much longer beyond the life of a project. And a lot of times we see, foreign assistance projects or from the World Bank or US government that seem to have some success, but then the project ends and things go back to where they were. So what we really wanted to know is, well, what is the evidence from the field that these projects have generated sustained benefits? What we were really trying to do was to inform Congress and inform taxpayers on whether that was a good investment to make.
Consistency is critically important as we keep efforts up, but unfortunately it hasn't been consistent. It's been pegged at one level and it has not been adjusted for inflation over time. So when the Global Food Security Act and we increased funding up to $55 million, that has stayed that way since it's been approved. And so that's worth about 30% less now. So we need to actually adjust this for inflation at a minimum. And then because the returns are so high, I would argue that when you can generate $8.50 for every $1 invested, there's very few vehicles out there, whether they are in the financial industry, and it's not just to one person, it's to society on a broader scale. Agricultural research generally targets the poorest of the poor. In low-income countries, those are really two well-identified segments of the population: the agricultural community and farmers who are eking out just enough to get by and marketing a little bit into the formal economy, and those that are in urban areas that are non-farmers, the urban poor, which allocates 70 to 80% of their budget just on food. So when we combine these two populations together, we can see that this is a broad lifting of populations out of poverty. And when we think about different levels of poverty, 75% or more of it is to those that are impoverished. And then when we get even tighter levels of living at just above $1 per day, those numbers, those beneficiaries are in the 35% range. And so it's just a clear targeting with broad application that makes agriculture so much different than many other aid programs.
I would argue that since agricultural research generally has had such a high payoff, that if anything, we should be spending a lot more money in this area. We're giving up a lot of potential gains that we're underinvesting in this area. We often find tension in our foreign aid investments toward, should we be putting money into immediate emergency relief, or should we be putting it into more long-term growth strategies? And what we have found is that the long-term growth strategies are very effective, and what they do is they help countries graduate from the need from foreign aid. So if you look at a country like Bangladesh, back in the 70s and 80s, it was the largest recipient of emergency food aid in the world. Billions of dollars in concessional food aid assistance were needed by the country every year. Now it's had a very successful couple of decades at rapid productivity growth in agriculture. It's moved from one of the poorest incomes to what we call more of a lower middle income country. A lot of its population is also now moving into the non-farm sector as food security is and food is more and farm is more productive. And it's basically much more able to provide for its own food needs. Now, most of our food aid is going to countries in Africa or countries, conflict countries, really, especially, but countries that haven't had that long-term growth success in agriculture. So it's really helping to reduce the need for emergency food assistance if you can, get that long-term agricultural and economic development underway.
Persistence pays in agricultural research investment. So it takes time to develop these innovations, and it takes time to develop confidence and trust amongst our partners in these target nations. So projects that run on a 3-year life cycle or a 5-year life cycle, it takes time just to get things started. One of the major investment activities of these labs has been in people, in human and institutional capacity development. So in our program alone, in the past 10 years, we have nearly 100 people that have been trained in master's degrees, a couple of undergraduates, PhDs, some postdocs, and these people go back to their home countries and are some of the strongest advocates for what they've learned and who's paid for the investment in their education. So these people take on junior roles in their agricultural research organizations. They then mature into mid-career professionals, and they begin to mentor additional young scientists. And then they go on to fulfill senior roles within their national programs, whether ministers of agriculture, directors of research for the equivalent of the USDA. And they have strong allegiances and loyalty to what they've learned through this U.S. investment. One thing that has really changed over time is that we've seen these long-term investments really generate capacity in our target nations. So much capacity that we like to think about forward evolution of the program and primarily de-evolution of the responsibility of U.S. universities for leadership of the research projects and activities. So a great example of this is the global level leadership provided by our partners in Senegal. They are at the forefront of understanding the global needs of pearl millet breeding and investment in activities that will strengthen yields for farmers that are living on the fringes of the desert. This is the last crop that can be grown before land turns into rangeland. And those conditions are very different from elsewhere. Their technical capabilities are the best in the world. We see the growth and leadership of scientists and collaborations amongst regional scientists that are deeply grounded in the problems and the stresses that are faced within a nation, within a nation in sub-areas, and then those that are shared regionally that are very different from what we may experience here in the United States. And so they are in the best position to provide leadership, and in the future we will only see greater devolution of responsibility to these partners.